So, folks, with all this talk about Israel-Palestine, you may have forgotten about the Ukraine war. But I made a short documentary film about the Ukraine war and the United States' involvement in the Ukraine war.
It's amazing how quickly you were able to put that together. You're a true genius.
I know. It was a lot because, we had Katie Halper on the show earlier in the stream. She made a documentary. I have a documentary that I'm editing about Jose Vega, which I was just on the phone with Jose today. We're talking about a release date because he's going to come back to the States very soon. So that'll be out very soon. But in the meantime, I thought I should release one. And so I put together this brief history of the Ukraine war. Here's my documentary film on the Ukraine war.
Will be. And the Russians are dying. It's the best money we've ever spent.
So I will not vote for any aid until we secure our own border. I'm not helping Ukraine until we help ourselves.
There it is, folks.
That was just amazing.
Can I get a round of applause, please?
It was so moving.
Yeah. No fat on that. It really moved. I felt it really had rhythm. It didn't stall.
But it was touching. It was touching also. It was very emotional.
That's what we call a well-paced documentary film on the Ukraine war. For context, here is the full 14-second clip of Lindsey Graham talking to Dana Bash about his pivots against funding for Ukraine. Shocker, isn't it? Here he is.
Not vote for any aid until we secure our own border. Reform asylum, reform parole is possible to do. Democrats don't want to do it. All Republicans want to do it. I'm not helping Ukraine until we help ourselves.
It's the best money we've ever spent. All of a sudden, hey, I'm not helping Ukraine until we help ourselves. So this was a New York Times article from a couple days ago, and we do have an update that I'll share with you after we read through some of this. The White House warns Ukraine aid is running out, pressing Congress for more. The White House warned congressional leaders on Monday that the United States would run out of money to send weapons to Ukraine by year's end, severely jeopardizing Kyiv's ability to defend itself against Russia if lawmakers fail to approve emergency military aid soon. The urgent warning from President Biden's top budget official, delivered in a blunt letter, was the administration's latest bid to pressure the Republicans resisting another infusion of aid to Ukraine to drop their opposition. It came at a critical time in the war as Ukraine struggles to push back Russian troops in a counteroffensive that has largely stalled. President Vladimir V. Putin has continued to send a steady stream of his forces into the conflict, willing to endure high casualties amid signs of flagging resolve from Kyiv's Western allies. It's almost like this is a war of what? A war of attrition?
Hey, who does a war of attrition favor again? I forget.
The country with the most people. The country with a frozen tundra of a climate. The country whose people are used to suffering. A country whose history is defined by perseverance through suffering. Yeah, that's who's likely to win the war of attrition. That's where the smart money is. We said that 2 years ago, and they called us Putin puppets. Meanwhile, now 500,000 corpses later, not quite 500,000. That's the total of dead and injured. But a few 100,000 corpses later, people are starting to see it our way. When are they going to listen to us the first time? When? We are out of money and nearly out of time. Shalonda D. Young, the director of the White House Office of Management and Budget.
If only Zelensky had read this book.
Yeah, there you go. Look at that.
Napoleon learned this to his everlasting grief. So did Hitler, actually.
We are out of money and nearly out of time, says Shalonda Young, the director of White House Office of Management and Budget, wrote in the letter, which was sent to House and Senate leaders in both parties. Cutting off the flow of U.S. weapons and equipment will kneecap Ukraine on the battlefield, not only putting at risk the gains Ukraine has made, but increasing the likelihood of Russian military victories, she continued, adding, this isn't a next year problem. The time to help a democratic Ukraine fight against Russian aggression is right now. On Capitol Hill, Republican backing for Ukraine's war effort has dwindled substantially in recent months. The party's leaders have said they will consider additional aid only in exchange for one of their top policy priorities, priorities major changes to border policy to severely limit the number of migrants entering the United States. And on Monday, the White House plea fell on deaf ears in the House, where Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, said Democrats have not done enough to earn the support of his members to send more to Ukraine. And this broke shortly before we went on the air. Republicans block Ukraine aid bill over border objections. So what has happened here, folks, is it seems like the Republican Party has basically ended the war in Ukraine. And they didn't do it because they wanted to.
Peaceniks.
Yeah, right. They didn't do it because, as Russell just sarcastically said, they are peaceniks. Lord knows Lindsey Graham has never seen a war that he didn't want to fund and or fight. Not himself. He wants to send his voters' kids to go fight. But he's never been anti-war, ever. He's never been against war. He was one of Zelensky's staunchest allies and most loyal mouthpieces on Capitol Hill. But the Republican voters clearly laid down the line and said, we are not for this. And not only are we not for this, but we are making this a key priority come primary season, come when you call us asking for money. And they were able to bring so much of that party to heel in a way that I didn't think they'd be able to do, right? The problem with the war machine is that it owns both parties, right? I mean, we said, well, yeah, I mean, you got more Republicans than Democrats are against the Ukraine war, but not enough of them are. They're still going to get every funding package through that they want. Then you saw that little force the vote effort, that little old force the vote effort from Matt Gaetz and a handful of hardliners in the GOP caucus. And that they started out as very annoying, very pesky, very disloyal, right? We saw all the hit pieces written about them in the press, how they're sowing all this chaos and how, you know, they're not going to get anything done. They don't know how to get anything done. Well, it turns out they seem to have gotten a lot done. They seem to have ended the Russia-Ukraine war because they're not going to be able to get more funding through for the war now. Now there's chirping about, Biden said into a microphone today that if Russia attacks a NATO ally, we'll put U.S. troops. Yeah, U.S. troops are not fighting in Ukraine. Yeah. There's not going to be nobody's going to go fight Joe Biden's war in Ukraine. All right. This seems to be winding down, and it seems to be the Republican base having cut their leaders into drawing a line in the sand. And because the Democrats are not willing to play ball on that, it seems like the funding has dried up, at least for now. I don't see how they get out of this. No, I mean, when you've lost Lindsey Graham, that's pretty much the ball game. That's like 2 Corinthians. That's it. That's the whole ball game. That's everything.
That's a cat was named Vagina.
Yeah.
That's when you've lost Lindsey Graham, you've lost the ball game. But I said that back during the Kevin McCarthy debacle, that, hey, if they were going to go so far as to oust a speaker on the suspicion that he was going to betray them on Ukraine funding, then this is never passing. This is never passing if they would push it to that level to get rid of a speaker. So that's it. That's the end of it. And, you tweeted out Jen Psaki complaining that Trump said he's going to come after MSNBC. Yeah. And you said, don't threaten us with a good time. Yeah. And that's how a lot of this stuff plays, because you have radical, deranged religious fanatic, which we have to start calling these people what they are. Chuck Schumer, religious fanatic Chuck Schumer, who claims that genocide has been justified by God and the enemy not believing in the Torah.
Exactly.
So religious fanatic Chuck Schumer is going to frame this as, this is so horrible what the Republicans are doing, and the media is going to parrot that take. Look at this dysfunction, cutting off funding to the Ukraine. And the majority of the American people are going to say, don't threaten us with a good time. Right. Do you really think there's some kind of like base out there beyond you're just absolutely most moronic, lobotomized suburban shit libs who they're with you thick and thin. It doesn't matter what you do. As long as Rachel Maddow tells them it's the right course, they'll believe it. But other than that, like, actual people, who do you think does not think it's a good idea to cut off funding to Ukraine? Like, where do you think this groundswell of support is going to come from in a
Look,
country
even if you
where
were rooting for even if you thought it was a great idea to fund the Ukrainian war effort, which of course we didn't because we knew as soon as the war started that the right thing to do was to make a peace deal, which would have fallen pretty much in line with the terms that Russia laid out, which was not the siege of Ukraine, not the capture of Ukraine by Russia. It was they wanted a path to the sea, so they wanted independence for the separatist regions. They wanted the Crimea, and they wanted a neutral Ukraine. And it sounds from reporting, we did a story on this last week, it sounds like Russia probably would have settled for 2 out of those 3. They probably would have taken Crimea and neutral Ukraine because they were really, NATO was the main sticking point there. Right? I mean, we don't know. We can't say that for sure, but that's the way it sounded like to me. Instead, you had this. And even if you were on board for this, the Ukrainians had their chance over the summer. They launched their big offensive, which moved the front lines not much at all. And past that point, any rational person says, okay, we cannot be pouring billions more dollars into this. And any humane person realizes we cannot be spilling more blood over this. This is psychotic, suicidal, and insane. And it's getting people murdered.
Well, yeah, I don't know how many people saw Jimmy played this. He did a segment where, they're doing like a USO thing and some Ukrainian woman is gamely singing to entertain these troops, these newly recruited troops who are going to go to the front line. These old men, they're in their 40s and their 50s. And you can see none of them are paying attention. They're on their phones. They're just... They're not buying it at all. This is how it always is with a war. When they first break out, everyone thinks it's the greatest idea ever. And then a couple years on, they realize it was the worst mistake they ever made.
Please clap.